Hi everyone. If you're watching this, that means you're someone that's really interested in learning more about Jacobsen syndrome. You might have a child that's suffering through it, or was recently diagnosed, or maybe has had it for quite some time and you're just trying to find information from different resources about what they've learned. Or maybe you're even a health professional that just wants to learn about it some more. Uh, I am a mom. My name is Sherry. I have a 3-year-old daughter who was diagnosed with Jacobsen syndrome back in 2014. My daughter was actually a twin, fraternal. Her twin, Lana, does not have the condition, which is interesting. Again, they weren't identical, they were actually fraternal, so one could look at it as two different babies. But my Layla was diagnosed with Jacobsen syndrome. I live in the Maryland area, so we actually had Johns Hopkins by our side, a team of extraordinary health professionals that were able to diagnose her very early on and help us with the care. So I really wanted to create this video because when I first learned about Jacobsen syndrome, I would poke around the internet, and again, this was 3 years ago, but it's very similar to today. There's not much out there about Jacobsen syndrome. It's a very new and rare condition. Not many people have it. I think Johns Hopkins had told me at the time in 2014 that Layla was one of maybe 100 cases reported in the entire world. If you think about the ratio, that is close to nothing in terms of learnings and knowledge. So it was a very scary thing, but I have learned over the last 3 years very many tips and tricks and education points that I think are going to be very helpful for parents or family members or friends of folks that have a child with Jacobsen syndrome, or maybe an adult with Jacobsen syndrome, that maybe you'll benefit from this. So I'm hoping that this video will help build some of those bridges and maybe give you some information that you never knew. This is one of many series I will do. This first one is particular to just an overview of Jacobsen syndrome. I actually pulled one of the most meaningful articles that I found online regarding Jacobsen syndrome from Healthline, and I just wanted to go over it with you a little bit. Again, a lot of this is geared towards what I experienced with my Layla. It may be exactly what you're seeing, or it may be completely different, or it may be somewhere in between. But I just wanted to share my experience and let you guys know what I went through and some of the things that I have done, me and myself and me and my husband together, to help our Layla cope. So I was going to go through this, not verbatim, but I just wanted to kind of touch on some of the highlights here. And again, I might be regurgitating stuff that you already know, or I might be exposing something that you have not heard yet. So, either way, I think it's good that we're sharing this. So I hope you find it beneficial. So this article talks about that there is no cure for Jacobsen syndrome, and there may be health complications that arise that prohibit child developmental milestones. So this is very true. Again, I have worked with a very extensive team at Johns Hopkins, from hematologists to cardiologists to urologists to eye doctors to a number of different doctors. And again, in different series, I'll explain some of the things that Layla went through specifically. But let's kind of go back and figure out how early on did I find out about Jacobsen syndrome. So when the girls were in my tummy, we did an echocardiogram. And during that echocardiogram, they were able to determine that there were some heart complications that Layla was having. And it's amazing because at the time, the heart is maybe half of a dime. So the technology is stupendous to be able to detect that type of defect. So I was told early on later in my 3rd trimester of my pregnancy, that there would be a very strong possibility that once Layla was delivered, she would be rushed to surgery to have heart surgery. So it was no surprise to me that she had some sort of heart defect while she was still in my tummy. Additionally, when we did a sonogram, they found some fluid backup in one of her kidneys, and they coined it hydronephrosis. You may have heard that if you have a child with that condition, or again an adult. But hydronephrosis is a urine buildup in the kidney. And at the time they said that surgery wouldn't be as imperative as the heart surgery. So heart surgery would come first, and then they would decide whether they need to do kidney surgery later on. So again, in my third trimester, I knew that something was happening. I did not know the extent, but I knew that something was wrong and we were going to fix it. On September 5th, I delivered my twins, and Lana, you know, God, thanks to God, she was fine. Layla, she's still my angel. Thank God she was fine, breathing. However, they did rush her into possibly surgery, but then they noticed that she was having a very difficult time breathing. They at the time they called it pulmonary hypertension, and she had to be placed on oxygen to help her breathe. So they rushed her to the NICU. They gave her oxygen, and they were hoping that within a couple days she would be normalized and ready for surgery. However, that never happened. Needless to say, fast forward 3 months, she was still in the NICU. At that point in time, she had weaned down on the oxygen. However, they realized that she was having difficulty swallowing and that she was not able to keep food down. So they initially started with the feeding tube that went into her nasal. But at some point they realized that that was not as effective as they would like, and she was not getting the right nutrients. So they ended up doing surgery to insert a GI tube in her tummy to feed her via feeding tube. That seemed to work, and shortly after that, once they normalized her at about 3 months old, she did get the heart surgery. They corrected her heart defect, and we thought that was it. Well, needless to say, they realized during the heart surgery that her platelets were kind of off. They ended up having to give her 3 or 4 blood transfusions. And after the surgery, they realized she had a platelet dysfunction, which, again, now I know was part of Jacobsen Syndrome, but at the time, I did not. Neither did they, to be honest. So we learned that, and they told us, you know, they were going to do some more testing. They wanted to keep her in the hospital. Layla was really a property of the hospital for a very long time, her early months of living. They did testing after testing after testing, and it all came back inconclusive. It was very difficult to understand what was happening. Then I got a call one day that they did a genetic landscape test, and it actually came back as Jacobsen Syndrome. And this is when my jaw hit the floor. I had never heard of Jacobsen Syndrome. I had never heard of anyone with Jacobsen Syndrome. Being in the health field, I worked at a cardiovascular medical device company, and now I'm doing orthopedics. I had not still heard of that condition. So it was very much a surprise to me and my husband and the rest of my family. So I wanted to learn more about it, and the more I read, the more I knew, and the more I learned. But essentially what it is a deletion of chromosome 11. And from what I've learned, it is a deletion that happens as a fluke during the reproductive process. It's not genetic in most cases. It generally hits females more than males, which was a very interesting find as well. Additionally, kids with the condition do not live beyond 2 years old. Now, these were my first children with my husband. Imagine the feeling I had thinking I just gave birth to beautiful twins, twin girls, and one of them may not make it beyond 2 years old. Not to mention, she has been diagnosed with this very rare condition, which even Johns Hopkins said clear out, this is very new to us. We don't have anything about this on file. Where Layla actually became a case study at Johns Hopkins. Imagine that. So I'm going back to this article. I just wanted to kind of give you the feel of what happened. The article says the life expectancy of children with this condition is unknown. However, most individuals have lived through adulthood, and many adults with Jacobsen syndrome can live happy, fulfilling, and semi-independent lives. I recall when they gave my husband and I the news over the phone. They said, "Can you come for a family meeting the following day?" We came, and all of the health professionals sat us in the room, and they did their best to calm us and comfort us. And I recall one female telling me her quality of life is very uncertain. It could be as subtle as a minor case of Down syndrome, or it could be more severe than the most extreme case of Down syndrome. It's unknown. There is not much data on Jacobsen syndrome to tell you what to expect. But she may be able to live a semi-independent life. What that means is she'll be able to pick up her toothbrush, but you'll have to brush her teeth. That's the example she gave me. And it hit home for me, and I still remember it 3 years later. Because I think about what I thought at that moment. The little things in life that you take for granted when your children are picking up toys, or the toothbrush to brush their teeth, and they're excited about the light that they're seeing on the toothbrush. My Layla would not be able to comprehend that exercise. And that was very difficult for me. But 3 years later, I have learned that that was more of a blessing than it was a difficulty. And I'll explain. It says here, many children with Jacobsen have eye disorders that affect their sight, but a lot of those complications can actually be treated. It's interesting they say this because Layla did have an eye issue. So, and this is something you might see with children or adults with Jacobsen syndrome. Layla was presumed to be potentially blind. So she was reviewed by the Maryland School of the Blind. They actually did some therapy with her, but then it concluded that she was actually not fully blind, which was a good thing to hear, meaning that she would be able to see. And the issue was her eyes were very narrow. So her eyelids were somewhat like this. So it was making it very difficult for her to see. So we actually had to have surgery to, one, help her see better. And actually, I take that back because her surgery also included her eyeball. So her eye actually was twitching as well. So when she would turn, it would kind of like do this little twitch, and she would look and it would do this little twitch. So we did reconstructive surgery on her eyes to better promote eyesight and eye awareness with Layla. So that's something very common. And the surgery was outpatient. She had it in conjunction with another surgery, which I'll talk about in a second, but it was outpatient. She didn't have much pain. It was just a matter of putting eye drops in her eyes every few hours, and within a week or two, she was fine. So I think that was one of the very minor surgeries that she had, but it made a world of difference because she was able to focus instead of her eye doing this shaking thing. She was able to focus on what she was looking at, which helped her also with her grabbing mechanisms, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. And again, this video might be long, just to kind of give you an overview, but then I'll have shorter videos to help with the different focuses I want to talk about. Because some children with Jacobsen syndrome have immune issues, they may be much more susceptible to infections. Ear and sinus infections are extremely common. My Layla gets sick every time someone else is sick, period. As she's in daycare, if kids are getting sick in daycare, you better believe that Layla's getting sick along with them. So She's very susceptible to ear and sinus infections as well as any colds. So if you have a child or an adult with Jacobsen syndrome, make sure that you're shielding them from any type of viruses